Hi y'all, what are we watching? The darkest acid trip story on the internet. Bro, yeah, let me know in the comments, bro. Y'all ever done acid, bro? Cause that's low key. It's not my thing, bro. It's weird when I can't control my own thoughts, you know? Yeah.
Story that I'm about to tell you, and one similar like it, can all be found on one website, Erowid.org, a place where trip reports are shared, both good and bad. And if after this video you are interested in reading more stories like this, the link to Erowid.org can be found in the description box down below. Our first story is from Hiab X. About 10 years ago, I bought my third tab from a guy in my hometown in Norwich, UK. It was a strawberry tab, and I was told that it had been double dipped. The guy had a reputation of selling good
Is double dip like double the amount of acid that's supposed to be in one pill?
acid, so I happily gave him my cash. My being in Norwich was just a social visit over a couple of days, and catching up with friends. On the last day there, I decided to drop a tab and use my friend's home as a trip HQ. He knew what I was up to, he had gone to work, and left me his keys to make myself comfortable. I took the single LSD tab in the late morning, in a positive state of mind, with no worries or anxieties. I began to come up on the acid towards lunchtime. It was the first time and the last time I'd ever trip alone. Outside, it was a glorious sunny day, but I was happy enough in my temporary sanctuary to not really think about going outside. After a while, the LSD rush started blazing up my spine and racing through my guts. I felt a little
See, that's the shit that freaks me out, bro. Like shit you can't really control like that. Like, hell nah, bro. Hell no.
easy, but I had enough in mind to allow myself to just go with it and just wait until the rush plateaued. After a while, it calmed down. I decided to sit upstairs in the house and listen to some music on the radio in the sunlit bedroom. I was having a wonderful time watching floral Escher type patterns breaking over my skin. I enjoyed looking in the mirror, looking at my grinning face and this distinct map contour patterns gently washing over my flesh. It really seemed like a great start. Well, I vaguely recalled deciding to go downstairs again for some reason, and the next thing I recall was awakening on the floor of the dining room alone. The first thing I noticed was that there were blowflies buzzing around a bowl of cat food on the kitchen floor, which was in view. I remember feeling perplexed as to why both flies had two bright neon after images in red
Yo, looking at this is like making me kinda woozy there, brother.
and blue. I sat up and tried to figure out why I was on the floor in the first place. Now, it's worth pointing out before I take you down this helter-skelter that somehow,
Huh? Helter Skelter? Skelter? I don't even know what he said, bro.
because of my blackout, I had completely forgotten that I'd taken anything at all. Prior to tripping though, I wrote myself a note of reassurance in case things got too weird. So sitting up on the floor still, I found my note and tried to read it. Alas, because I was on acid, the words made no sense to me. Instead, they morphed like alien glyphs and danced around the piece of paper. It was then my last little link of sanity crumbled, and I heard my voice utter the terrifying words, "I've gone mad." I had a feeling that I had to be somewhere else, which then got heightened by the digital watch I was wearing suddenly beeping a time alarm at me, but I had no idea why or what it meant, so I left my sanctuary, and I later found out that I left the back door wide open, thus making the house entirely a burglar's free-for-all. I remember waking up almost on autopilot on a busy street heading towards town. I saw one of my old teachers who saw me, but the only thing I did was force a grin and keep on walking. And I did indeed walk. Not so much as a conscious effort or with any sense of intent. I felt utterly out of control. I collided with someone carrying their shopping, vaguely heard them cuss at me as I continued my stride. I turned down a passageway between two houses and strolled through the back door of a house I'd once lived in, then past the new inhabitant and out the front door. I walked into the city center from there. I still don't know how I survived crossing roads,
Bro, why the hell are you walking through city centers if you're cracked out on acid, bro? Like, even on low weed, bro, if I go out low key, it's not good. I don't fuck with it like that, you know?
but I did. From there, I strolled into a city cafe where my friend's son was working. He saw me and said hello, but in my acid-addled state of autopilot, I just walked past him into the main cafe and sat down. Then I stood up and walked out of the cafe without uttering a word. Other than being completely out of lunch on LSD, at that time on the trip, I don't recall hallucinating. Instead, I felt like a puppet on a string guided by some subconscious walking mechanism which had its own design on where I should be, and there certainly wasn't any cognitive thinking that guided my actions. After the brief cafe episode of the trip, the situation just went from bad to worse. Somehow I navigated myself through Norwich and then began to head in the direction of the city's Central Park. As a child, I'd always felt a sense of friendliness and comfort there, but now in my fried state of mind, the familiar comfort of this park had shifted to its polar opposite. I was now hallucinating on top of everything else. The people in the park were walking around, but my perception had begun to distort, their heads and faces beyond any form of human recognition. If you could imagine.
Okay, see, that's how you actually go crazy, bro. Like, when you take drugs like this, don't do drugs, children, but when you take drugs like this, like, I feel like you don't look at yourself the same. What I would think that would happen. Like, because you just see shit that you, or think of shit that you never, ever, ever think of if you're not on these type of psychedelic drugs.
Imagine for a moment being surrounded by people in a busy place where their heads had been removed and replaced by squids and octopus. You might begin to accurately picture the scene confronting me in this park. Everyone had tentacles smothering their faces and dangling down their necks like fleshy snake beards. Even the women and children were not exempt from this disfiguration. The octopoid heads were white in appearance, and each person seemed to have baleful staring eyes where their ears should have been. Even in my state of autopilot, I felt nothing but sheer terror at this alien swarm of people walking around me. My feet obviously decided to take evasive maneuvers because I then found myself out of the park, having crossed yet another treacherous main road and was now heading towards a multi-story apartment block. I recall that I got inside the building somehow and wandered in circles on one of the floors of the apartment block. I seemed stuck in a loop of wanting to get out, walking around a circle of short corridors and arriving at a janitor's cupboard. I would open the door expecting to find an exit and be confronted by the dead end of cleaning products and brooms. I would repeat this several times like a fly that desperately flies around in circles around the kitchen only to collide with the same window again.
Not gonna lie, I've been caught in a loop once when I was high, off weed though. I've been caught in a loop of just going back and forth and doing the same shit. But even like if you're sober, bro, low key, you think about it, you ever went to the fridge, came back, went back, came back, went back? That's low key, like, just, that was some dumbass shit to say, bro. I don't even, my bad, yo.
And again and again. I don't remember how I finally broke the loop, but I did. The next thing that happened was the memory of walking around some side streets into someone's back garden via an alleyway, and I recall a middle-aged woman looking a little afraid of me because I was in her yard and seeing her rush into the house, closing the door behind her. I left the yard and I think I walked between two garages. The gap between them was tight. Perhaps I tried to go through it anyway. In my mind, I was being trapped inside an ever-tightening spiral that I relentlessly marched along. As the spiral tightened, my body would begin to crush. If it were to continue down the spiral, I would surely be crushed to my final atom. This realization broke me out of my loop, and then I quickly realized that I was next to another main road in Norwich, in front of someone's garden. While looking at the garden in front of this house, the inside of my mouth felt like plant matter, and when I tried to scream, my tongue shot out a mix of flesh and thorny rose stem. The situation was utterly hopeless, and it's getting worse and worse with each lysergic internal minute.
This guy's good at telling these stories, eh?
The other side of the main road was a dental repair workshop. It was a discreet looking place, and it looked just as much as part of the houses that were above it. I recall that I walked into this workshop to the surprise of the men who were working there. I think they said, "Hey, where do you think you're going?" etc. But I was too far gone and on my way out again, still under the guidance of the momentum and hidden agenda of this autopilot within me. The adjacent street began the final demise of my terrifying trip, and you'll have to indulge me in this part and go with the flow of reality and abstract woven together. First off, like a lemming, I walked across this side road onto the pavement and then promptly plummeted a good 7 feet into someone's basement flat. There had probably been a flight of steps leading down to this concrete pit, but I didn't see them, and I wouldn't have known what to do with them if I had. I guess I clambered up the street level again and limped my way up to this street, which was a bit of a cul-de-sac. Part of my subconscious memory must have recalled that an ex-girlfriend had lived there, and I found myself walking up to her old front door, which was one of those aluminum framed
What the fuck? You're showing up to your ex's crib, bro? On acid?
double glazed types. I recall my reflection in the door looking somewhat like a Francis Bacon painting, a mixture of anguished flesh and black oils dripping like blood down my body. I was falling in internal darkness like a fleshy sack of bricks. As I fell forever, I would crash through the intermittent panes of glass that would shatter and tear me in never-ending descent. With the sound of breaking glass was the wavering crescendo of the word mad, repeating in waves. Mad, 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 mad. Over and over.
Mad, 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 mad.
Over and over as I plummeted, I ripped and torn into darkness with splinters of glass falling beside me. These visuals and auditory hallucinations brought me down to my knees. I was now a 7-year-old child laying on the pavement. My best friend's parents stood over me, feeling concerned, asking what happened. He hit his head, someone says. Call an ambulance, someone says. And during all of this, a disc-shaped hole appeared above me with someone's arm reaching down to try and pull me up into safety. I tried to reach up to the grasping hand, but I couldn't. Then the hole disappeared. After that moment, I was staggering along the street again, at the bottom of the cul-de-sac. My gaze lifted into the sky, and the sky's gaze fell upon me. Each cloud was now a giant type of amoeba-type organism covered in dots which pulsated in color like the skin of a cuttlefish. Each giant amoeba had a giant blue human-looking eye observing me. I could hear voices taunting me, telling me I was stupid, telling me how thick I was for looking for the answers, telling me I had spastic consciousness. The amoebas seemed to be singing a never-ending song which was something like this. I am an unsquamatic peel, and if you ever know what I feel, then I know that I felt like this before, and I always knew what I was timely for, and this was repeated 1,000 times. I briefly saw existence as a giant clock face of 1 billion dots between each second. The dots were clicking forward in a relentless advance like the movement of the second hand, and I realized in that moment, each dot was the equivalent of someone's lifetime. My internal monologue was running this entire time. It described that living and dying was part of this internal chain, and that the clock was measuring it all. Then the monologue started laughing at my dismay. In reality, I became conscious enough to recognize that I'd been stumbling through a children's play area at the base of the cul-de-sac. It's worth describing to you.
Bro, I knew a teacher, or not a teacher, like a family doctor, who did like a controlled experiment of trying hard drugs, and he had people around him to see what kind of reactions he would have. And the nigga ended up jumping out of the fucking window, bro, and died because he did that fucking bullshit, bro. Like, don't do drugs, kids. Just don't do drugs, bro.
A little bit about the geography of the area I was. Adjacent to the cul-de-sac was a small path that leads about 4 flights of stone steps leading down to the street below. This street is called Park Lane, and if you go through the gap in the fence at the back of the children's play area, there's a steep, overgrown embankment that leads down to a flint gravel parking area at the rear of the Park Lane Hotel. Guess which route I took? In reality, I passed the gap of the fence, failed to notice the dangerous drop below, and then tumbled down the embankment into the flint parking area. I was crawling on my hands and knees by this point. A piece of flint had torn the palm of my hand, making it look like a stigmata wound, which was pretty appropriate to the following delusion. Once I looked up from my palm, the entire parking lot looked like a sea of holes. After looking up from the ground, I noticed that I'm in a white void with an infinity of swarming black dots. I could hear air raid sirens and the sounds of buzzing. I looked down again at the sea of dots, and I noticed a cross, which had a festering pile of bloody guts and organs spread across it, staining the wood in crimson. The guts were smothered in wasps, stinging the ruined flesh, causing venomous pustules. It was an image of impossible pain, and then the monologue returned, booming over the sirens and droning over the wasps. This is Christ. He is still suffering for your sins, still paying the price. More laughter than a fleeting moment of reality. I just chose to cross the park lane. I wanted to leave. I collapsed in the gutter on the other side of the road. My jacket was gone, and I noticed I was covered in cuts and grazes. At that very moment, a wasp had landed on my elbow and was making a snack for itself of my cuts. I remember trying to brush it away, and it stung me as I did. I managed to get this wasp off of me, and I noticed there was a woman pushing a pram and looking at me with concern, and for a moment looking at her granted me a second of sanity. But the moment she was outside of my sight, I was thrown right back into LSD hell. My body was a giant green mass of flesh, punctured all over by cactus-like thorns that had grown from within and broken my skin on the way out. I had no arms and legs. I was more like a mass of tendrils. My form was that of pain, nothing more and nothing less. A brief flash of a police car pulling up beside me and someone getting out. I was in pain, floating in a sea of holes. There were billions of holes, each one a
Probably because you fucking fell down an embankment, brother. Like, where did you even start? In his house, right? And this guy ended up going through streets, garages, this and this, and now he's at the bottom of an embankment, bro. Again, don't do drugs, kids.
Passage leading into an identical ocean of swarming black dots. The monologue told me there was only one hole which led me away from here, and in one blink, I was in a hospital, lying on a padded vinyl mattress with medics standing around me. I noticed I was human-shaped again, and at that very moment, the doors swung open to reveal an idyllic countryside scene of green hilly pastures, bathed in glorious sunlight, and a friendly-looking oak tree in the foreground view. If only I could crawl through those doors, I would be safe, my soul saved, but I couldn't move. The doors swung shut and opened again, and now I could see a hospital corridor instead of the fields. Someone was being pushed past on a stretcher, and in that moment I knew that my salvation was lost. I was thrust back into the sea of holes. It seems that my gaze in any direction would erase the black dots and their masses. For the first time in this nightmare, I felt a sense of conscious hope. I began to wipe swaths of dots by sweeping glances in the void around me. What have you taken? I was gaining hope by the minute, stripping the black dots away, removing these taunting false exits. What have you taken? Was it acid? Surrounded by self-created white void of comfort, I gazed at the final bunch of black dots, and I knew my release from hell was merely held by these remaining few. He's out of it still. I gazed at all but two black dots away. These two now had a bridge akin to a line seen in a dot-to-dot puzzle. In my mind, my voice returned as I stared at each dot. I heard my internal voice yelling, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 2. Then the two dots looked like my own hands with cuffs around them. The black line bridge had become a visible chain. The white void had faded to become a hospital room. I was in fact on my back on a hospital bed with my arms taped behind me. I was looking through my legs at my wrists, grazed with the rubbing pressure of police handcuffs around them. And then I yelled, "Get these fucking handcuffs off me! Get them off of me!" In the room with me were a male and female police officer. They had obviously been the people who had lifted me from the Park Lane gutter and taken me to the hospital. The male officer obliged my demand and removed the cuffs, and the female police officer asked me stuff like my name and if I knew where I was. But the best thing I could muster was a brief groan. They both looked a bit frustrated and left me in the room on the hospital bed alone. I was rapidly regaining my sense of self and conscious of reality. I recalled that I indeed dropped acid sometime earlier. My hospital surroundings and the amount of cuts and bruises I had were a confirmation to me that whatever I'd done, it had seriously backfired big time. I sat on the edge of the hospital bed, noted a number of missing items I had recalled having on my person prior to all of this. I found my pumps in the bedside cabinet and put them on. Then I took my first deliberate steps across the room. The bizarre nature of this entire episode had one final twist installed for me. I recall walking to the door of my single bedroom and opening it. A few feet away from me were the two police officers facing each other, having an intense conversation about what to do about me. They were so engrossed in their discussion that neither of them noticed as I came out of the room and began walking down the hospital corridor. There was a window that stood from floor to ceiling, the type that pivots in the central vertical axis. So judging that I could fit through the gap, I squeezed through it. There's little left to tell of this story, except to say my walk from the hospital to the train station was quite distressing. I was in a lot of pain, had stitches on my chin, my elbow, and hand. My right forearm had swollen up purple, making it look like Popeye's right hook. I was still semi-hallucinating, but very aware of how I'd nearly died and how I had a lot of explaining to do when I got home to my girlfriend. There were no legal repercussions for giving the police the slip. I had caught a train back home to a village in Suffolk, which was outside of the Norfolk police's jurisdiction. However, they had contacted my father, who was in Norfolk, so I had quite a bit of explaining to do for him too. In retrospect, it was the worst day of my entire life. It was the closest I can imagine to having full-blown psychosis. I think it was nothing short of a miracle that I didn't end up over someone's car bonnet or worse. Do I believe the monologues and symbols of that day? I'm not entirely sure I do. I now understand the intense adrenaline bursts while hallucinating are responsible for dragging the mind into an abyss of fear in the worst possible scenarios. I kind of feel that I would have had a very bleak outlook for life in reality if I believed for a moment that anything I saw on that trip was true. I've had some other trips which were glorious and the polar opposite of that day. So, I tend to agree with Aldous Huxley that heaven and hell are both valid states of consciousness. It all depends on where the person is at and how we navigate through the psychedelic state, which determines which destination we arrive at. If anything puzzles me about that day, it would have to be the blackout I experienced early in the trip. I suspect that if I had not lost consciousness, I probably would have not forgotten that I took a drug and therefore wouldn't have panicked myself into an eternal hell fractal. This trip report was shared on
Good video. Good video. I think that video deserves a like. Cause I like that video actually. I liked it.